Sometimes the biggest mistake isn't breaking the law. It's interrupting the people protecting it. The morning air carried the sharp chill of early fall as commuters, government employees, and contractors streamed through the security gate of the Jefferson Federal Complex outside Washington, D.C. The steady rhythm of badge scanners, vehicle inspections, and hurried footsteps blended into the familiar soundtrack of another ordinary weekday. At least, that was how it seemed. Officer Ethan Brooks had worked gate security long enough to trust his instincts more than anyone else's. Every unusual glance, every unexpected pause, every person who appeared too calm or too nervous caught his attention. That morning, one woman stood out without saying a single word. She approached the pedestrian entrance wearing a charcoal business jacket, carrying a plain black shoulder bag, and walking with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly where she was going. Her name was Naomi Carter. To everyone watching, she looked like another professional arriving for work. To Officer Brooks, something felt wrong. He stepped forward before she reached the scanner. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stop right there." Naomi stopped immediately. She didn't argue. She didn't sigh. She simply looked at him with calm brown eyes that revealed nothing. Around them, people slowed their pace just enough to notice. A security checkpoint always attracted attention, and curiosity spread faster than morning traffic. Brooks asked for identification. Naomi reached slowly toward her pocket, then paused. "Officer," she said evenly, "I'd appreciate it if you allowed me to continue without delay." The request sounded unusual. It wasn't defiant. It wasn't fearful. Somehow, that made Brooks even more suspicious. "That's not how this works," he replied. "Identification first." Naomi glanced briefly toward the large digital clock mounted above the entrance. 7:43. She looked back at Brooks. "Time matters more than you realize." Those words only reinforced his concern. Two additional officers quietly moved closer, responding without being asked. One commuter stepped aside and lifted a phone, pretending to read messages while secretly watching the encounter unfold. Brooks noticed Naomi's small earpiece, nearly hidden beneath her hair. "Remove the earpiece," he instructed. She remained perfectly still. "I can't do that." The answer came without emotion, almost rehearsed. Brooks exchanged a quick look with his partner. Every second seemed to increase the tension around the gate. The steady flow of employees slowed to a crawl as whispers drifted across the security line. Nobody knew why the situation felt so serious. They only sensed that something unusual was happening. Brooks made his decision. Following protocol as he understood it, he informed Naomi she was being temporarily detained until her identity and intentions could be verified. She neither resisted nor protested as he secured handcuffs around her wrists. Gasps rippled through the growing crowd. Naomi lowered her eyes for only a moment before looking once more at the clock. 7:44. Then she quietly said something that almost disappeared beneath the surrounding voices. "You still have a chance to fix this." Brooks barely reacted. To him, the statement sounded like another attempt to influence the situation. But Naomi wasn't looking at him anymore. She was watching the entrance road beyond the gate, as though expecting someone, or something, that had not yet arrived. Unknown to everyone standing there, the real countdown had already begun, and the ordinary morning outside the federal complex was only seconds away from becoming the center of a mistake no one present would ever forget. Officer Ethan Brooks had completed hundreds of security stops during his career, and every one of them had ended with a clear answer. Either the concern disappeared within minutes, or it turned into a routine report before everyone returned to work. That certainty had become part of his confidence. It was why he ignored the uneasy feeling growing somewhere beneath his uniform. Naomi Carter stood quietly beside the security barrier, her hands secured, her expression unchanged. She did not look embarrassed by the growing crowd. She did not appear angry about being delayed. Instead, she seemed focused on something beyond the checkpoint itself. Every few seconds, her eyes drifted toward the entrance road before returning to the large digital clock above the gate. 7:45. 1 minute had passed. One of the younger officers stepped closer to Brooks and lowered his voice. "She has not argued once. That is unusual." Brooks nodded without taking his eyes off Naomi. People react differently under pressure. The younger officer looked uncertain, but said nothing more. Nearby, government employees whispered as they waited for permission to continue through security. A delivery driver remained inside his truck with the engine idling, watching through the windshield. A woman carrying a travel mug quietly asked another employee if they knew what had happened. Nobody had an answer. Everyone only had theories. Brooks asked Naomi another question. "Who are you here to meet?" She answered without hesitation. "Someone who cannot afford for me to be late." Brooks frowned. "Names." Naomi remained silent for several seconds before speaking again. "I cannot provide them." It sounded rehearsed, almost disciplined. Brooks had encountered individuals who refused to cooperate before, but something about Naomi felt different. She was not hiding behind anger or fear. She was protecting something. That thought briefly crossed his mind before training pushed it aside. Procedure came first. An officer retrieved Naomi's shoulder bag and placed it carefully on the inspection table. Inside were ordinary items: a notebook, a bottle of water, reading glasses inside a protective case, a portable phone charger. Nothing immediately alarming. Then another officer noticed a slim envelope sealed with a federal security label. "Should we open this?" he asked. Naomi finally showed the smallest hint of concern. "Please do not." Brooks looked directly at her. "Why not?" "Because it is not meant for anyone at this checkpoint." Her answer only increased the uncertainty surrounding the envelope. Brooks instructed the officer to leave it sealed until supervisors arrived. At that exact moment, Naomi tilted her head slightly, almost as if she were listening to something no one else could hear. The tiny earpiece remained hidden beneath her hair. Brooks noticed the subtle movement. "Who are you communicating with?" She answered calmly. "No one anymore." Those words lingered in the air. No one anymore. They sounded less like reassurance and more like quiet disappointment. Brooks followed her gaze toward the roadway outside the complex. Morning traffic continued moving steadily past the entrance. Families drove children to school. City buses rolled through nearby intersections. Everything looked completely normal. Yet Naomi's expression suggested that something important had just changed somewhere beyond anyone's sight. 7:46 flashed across the digital clock. Naomi closed her eyes for less than a second before opening them again. Her shoulders remained relaxed, but her voice carried a weight that had not been there before. "The window has closed." Brooks stared at her without responding. He had no idea what window she meant, but for the first time that morning, certainty began slipping away. Around them, the conversations faded as a distant convoy of dark government vehicles appeared on the horizon, moving toward the checkpoint with a speed and purpose that instantly silenced everyone watching. The convoy reached the outer security lane in less than 30 seconds, moving with remarkable precision before stopping in perfect alignment near the checkpoint. 4 black sport utility vehicles with government license plates stood silently beneath the morning sun, their polished surfaces reflecting the growing crowd gathered around the entrance. No flashing lights, no raised voices, just a level of discipline that immediately changed the atmosphere. Every conversation stopped. Every pair of eyes shifted toward the vehicles. Officer Ethan Brooks instinctively straightened his posture as several men and women stepped out wearing dark business attire, with visible federal credentials hanging from their jackets. They moved quickly but without panic, exchanging brief words through concealed communication devices while scanning the area with practiced awareness. The individual leading the group was a tall man in his early 50s whose calm expression carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to making critical decisions. His name was Deputy Director Daniel Mercer. He did not begin by asking what had happened. Instead, his eyes moved across the checkpoint until they landed on Naomi Carter. The moment he saw the handcuffs around her wrists, the confidence in his face disappeared, replaced by controlled disbelief. He walked directly toward Officer Brooks. His voice remained calm, but every word carried unmistakable weight. "Who authorized the detention of Agent Naomi Carter?" Brooks blinked. "Agent." Mercer held his gaze without answering immediately. Around them, several members of the federal team were already examining the security area, quietly speaking with one another while checking watches and receiving updates through encrypted devices. Naomi finally looked toward Mercer. Their eyes met for only a second. She gave an almost invisible shake of her head. It was enough. Mercer understood. Whatever opportunity had existed only moments earlier was now gone. He closed his eyes briefly before taking a slow breath. Brooks felt the certainty he had relied on all morning disappear. "Sir," he began carefully, She refused to identify herself and would not explain why she needed immediate access. Mercer answered without raising his voice. She could not explain because doing so would have compromised an active federal operation. Silence settled over the checkpoint. The words seemed almost impossible to process. Brooks glanced toward Naomi, who remained as composed as she had been since the first moment he stopped her. There was no satisfaction in her expression, no frustration, only quiet acceptance. Mercer turned toward one of his agents. Status. The younger agent lowered a tablet after reading several incoming messages. Primary objective changed direction at 7:45. Surveillance teams lost visual confirmation 3 minutes later. Secondary units are attempting relocation. Nobody needed to explain what that meant. The opportunity they had spent months preparing for had slipped away. Mercer nodded once, absorbing the information without visible emotion. Then he looked back at Brooks. Agent Carter was the final link in a coordinated operation involving multiple federal agencies. Every minute mattered. Every movement had been timed. Every delay created consequences. Brooks suddenly remembered Naomi looking repeatedly at the digital clock above the gate. He remembered her saying time mattered more than he realized. He remembered her quiet warning that the window had closed. Those words no longer sounded mysterious. They sounded painfully accurate. One of the federal agents stepped forward with a small electronic device. After confirming several encrypted credentials, he carefully removed the sealed envelope from the inspection table without opening it. Another agent approached Naomi with visible respect. Mercer gave a single nod. Remove the restraints. For the first time that morning, the checkpoint no longer felt like a place where one officer had successfully completed a routine security stop. It felt like the exact place where an entire operation had quietly come apart. The metal restraints were removed with quiet professionalism, and Naomi Carter slowly rubbed her wrists before smoothing the sleeve of her jacket, as though she were preparing for an ordinary meeting instead of standing in the center of an extraordinary mistake. She did not glare at Officer Ethan Brooks. She did not demand an apology. She simply picked up her shoulder bag from the inspection table, while another federal agent carefully handed her the sealed envelope that had never been opened. Around them, the crowd remained unusually silent. Government employees who had moments earlier whispered with curiosity now exchanged uncertain glances, realizing they had witnessed something far more significant than a routine security stop. Brooks wanted to speak, but every sentence he considered sounded inadequate before he even formed the words. Deputy Director Daniel Mercer stepped beside Naomi and quietly asked, "Can we still recover it?" She looked toward the roadway where the morning traffic continued flowing as though nothing unusual had happened. "Not the original opportunity," she answered. "If they change the route after I missed the checkpoint, they will assume the schedule was compromised." Mercer nodded slowly. The disappointment in his face was impossible to miss, but it was directed at the situation rather than the people standing before him. He turned toward Brooks once more. "You followed the information available to you. The problem is that not every operation allows us to share what we know." Brooks listened without interrupting. The explanation offered little comfort. He remembered every detail from the previous 15 minutes. Naomi's request to continue without delay, her repeated attention to the digital clock, her refusal to expose protected information, her calm warning that time mattered more than anyone realized. None of it had sounded important until now. A communications specialist hurried toward Mercer carrying a secure tablet. "Sir, additional teams have confirmed the convoy never reached the scheduled exchange point. They diverted after the communication blackout." Mercer accepted the update with another measured nod. "Continue monitoring every alternate location." The specialist left immediately. Brooks noticed that none of the federal personnel blamed Naomi. Not one questioned her decisions. They treated her as someone who had done exactly what her assignment required despite circumstances completely outside her control. That quiet respect revealed more about her role than any official title ever could. Naomi finally looked directly at Brooks. There was no anger in her expression. There was only the calm composure that had remained with her since the beginning. "You were trying to protect this facility," she said. Brooks lowered his eyes briefly. "I may have protected one entrance while closing another." Naomi considered his words before answering. "Every decision carries consequences. That is true for all of us." Her response surprised everyone standing nearby. No accusation. No bitterness. only an honest acknowledgement of responsibility shared across different roles. Mercer glanced toward the security checkpoint, then toward the dozens of employees still waiting patiently behind the barriers. Resume normal operations, he instructed the federal team. No unnecessary attention. Within minutes, agents began returning to their vehicles while others quietly disappeared into the federal complex. The checkpoint slowly came back to life as badge scanners beeped once again and vehicles resumed entering the property. Yet nothing truly felt normal anymore. Brooks remained standing near the inspection table, watching Naomi walk beside Mercer toward one of the waiting sport utility vehicles. Just before reaching the passenger door, she paused for a single moment and looked back at the entrance where everything had changed. The morning schedule would continue. The building would open. Employees would return to meetings. Reports would be filed. But for everyone who had witnessed those few unforgettable minutes, the checkpoint would never again feel like an ordinary place where every answer could be found by following routine alone. The federal vehicles disappeared beyond the secured entrance one by one, leaving behind an unsettling silence that lingered far longer than the sound of their engines. Officer Ethan Brooks remained at his post, but the familiar rhythm of checking identification badges and directing traffic no longer felt automatic. Every face that approached the gate reminded him how quickly appearances could mislead even the most experienced officer. The checkpoint resumed its routine, yet routine itself seemed strangely fragile. Shortly after 8:15, Brooks received a call from his immediate supervisor instructing him to report to the administrative conference room as soon as another officer relieved his position. The request sounded calm, almost ordinary, but everyone in law enforcement recognized that calm voices often carried the most serious conversations. 20 minutes later, Brooks entered a modest meeting room overlooking the eastern parking lot. His supervisor, Captain Laura Mitchell, sat beside an internal compliance representative, while Deputy Director Daniel Mercer occupied the chair across the table. No one appeared hostile. No one raised their voice. The atmosphere reflected professionalism rather than accusation. Captain Mitchell began quietly. This meeting is to establish an accurate timeline. We are interested in facts, not assumptions. Brooks nodded. He appreciated the distinction, even though it did little to ease the weight pressing against his thoughts. Mercer placed a folder on the table, but kept it closed. Agent Naomi Carter has already submitted her initial statement, he said. She confirmed that you followed the procedures available to you based on the information you possessed. Brooks looked up with visible surprise. She said that. Mercer nodded once. She did. For the first time since the morning began, Brooks felt a small measure of relief, but it vanished almost immediately. Then the operation failed because I delayed her. Mercer answered carefully. Operations involving multiple agencies rarely succeed or fail because of one person alone. However, timing was a critical factor today. The room fell silent again. Captain Mitchell opened a notebook. Walk us through every observation that influenced your decision. Brooks described Naomi's calm demeanor, the concealed earpiece, the unusual request to bypass delay, the sealed envelope, and her refusal to identify the individual she intended to meet. As he spoke, he realized something unexpected. Every detail that had increased his suspicion also fit someone protecting classified information. The same facts supported two completely different conclusions depending on the context available. Mercer finally opened the folder resting before him. Inside were photographs, time charts, and heavily redacted documents that revealed only fragments of a much larger picture. This is all I am authorized to show you, he explained. The operation had been planned for nearly 8 months. Agent Carter's arrival at the checkpoint was synchronized with multiple surveillance teams positioned across the region. The schedule allowed almost no margin for delay. Brooks stared at the timeline. The difference between success and failure measured less than 5 minutes. He remembered the digital clock above the gate changing minute by minute while Naomi quietly warned that time mattered. Those moments now carried an entirely different meaning. Captain Mitchell leaned forward. Officer Brooks, what have you learned from this morning? He considered the question longer than anyone expected. Finally, he answered with complete honesty. Experience teaches us to trust our instincts. Today taught me that instincts must always leave room for humility. Mercer slowly closed the folder. A faint expression of respect crossed his face. That lesson has served many federal agents well over the years. Outside the conference room window, the Jefferson Federal Complex continued operating exactly as it had every other weekday. Employees crossed sidewalks carrying coffee, delivery trucks entered loading bays, and meetings filled office calendars. To everyone else, the morning had already become another ordinary workday. Only a handful of people knew that beneath the appearance of normal routine, one quiet decision at a security gate had altered the course of an operation that would never unfold exactly as planned again. 3 days passed before Officer Ethan Brooks received another unexpected call. The message was brief, requesting his presence at a federal conference facility located less than 2 miles from the Jefferson Federal Complex. No explanation accompanied the invitation. Only a building number, a meeting time, and a reminder to bring his official credentials. Brooks spent the drive replaying every decision from that morning. He had already completed reports, answered questions, and reviewed body camera footage with investigators. He assumed another interview awaited him. Instead, he found something entirely different. A federal security officer escorted him through several controlled access points before leading him into a quiet conference room overlooking a courtyard lined with American flags moving gently in the autumn breeze. Deputy Director Daniel Mercer stood near the window speaking with 2 senior officials. Naomi Carter sat at the opposite end of the table reviewing several documents. She looked exactly as composed as she had at the checkpoint, her attention focused completely on the pages before her. When Brooks entered, everyone looked up. Mercer walked forward first and extended his hand. "Thank you for coming, Officer Brooks." Brooks accepted the handshake, still uncertain why he had been invited. "I was told this meeting was important." "It is," Mercer replied. "Please have a seat." After everyone settled around the table, Mercer opened the discussion without unnecessary formalities. "The operation that was interrupted has been fully evaluated." Brooks remained silent. While the original objective was lost, Mercer continued, "The investigation itself remains active. Our analysts recovered additional information from surveillance collected before the schedule changed. We are moving forward using a different strategy." Brooks released a quiet breath he had not realized he was holding. The mission had not ended after all. It had adapted. Mercer glanced toward Naomi. "Agent Carter requested that you hear this directly instead of reading a summary through official channels." Brooks looked toward her with genuine surprise. Naomi folded her hands on the table before speaking. "Operations like ours are built around uncertainty. We prepare for unexpected events because unexpected events always happen." Brooks shook his head slightly. "But I caused one of them." Naomi answered with the same calm honesty that had defined every conversation between them. "You became part of one of them. There is a difference." The distinction settled heavily in the room. Mercer activated a large display screen showing a simplified timeline. Most details remained classified, but enough information appeared to explain what Brooks had never understood. Colored markers represented multiple federal teams positioned across several locations throughout the region. Naomi's arrival at the checkpoint had synchronized with movements occurring miles away. The schedule depended upon precision measured in minutes rather than hours. Brooks finally understood why she had watched the digital clock with such quiet urgency. Every minute she counted connected to dozens of people he had never seen. Mercer pointed toward the final marker on the screen. "When Agent Carter was delayed, our primary target altered travel plans. We lost that opportunity, but the adjustment exposed another communication channel that analysts might never have discovered otherwise." Brooks looked carefully at the timeline. "So something valuable still came from that morning." Mercer nodded. "Investigations often move in unexpected directions." Naomi closed the folder resting before her and stood. "That is why no one succeeds alone. We rely on preparation, discipline, and the willingness to learn when plans change." Brooks met her eyes for the first time since the checkpoint without the weight of confusion standing between them. He realized that the greatest lesson from that morning was not simply about procedures or authority. It was about recognizing that every person standing on the same side of justice might be carrying responsibilities invisible to everyone else. The meeting ended without ceremony, but its impact remained with Officer Ethan Brooks long after he walked back into the crisp afternoon sunlight. As he crossed the courtyard, he noticed the American flag moving steadily above the federal building. reminding him that service often depended on thousands of people performing different responsibilities without ever fully understanding one another's roles. For the first time since the incident at the checkpoint, he felt less burdened by regret and more determined to become a better officer. Over the following weeks, life at the Jefferson Federal Complex settled into a familiar routine. Security checkpoints operated on schedule, employees flowed through the gates each morning, and reports from the incident quietly disappeared into official archives. Most people had already forgotten the unusual morning that briefly interrupted their commute. Brooks had not. Every shift began with a different mindset. Instead of relying solely on instinct, he found himself asking more careful questions, listening longer before drawing conclusions, and paying closer attention to details that did not fit simple explanations. His fellow officers noticed the change. One afternoon, the younger officer who had stood beside him during the incident approached while they monitored incoming vehicles. "You have been different lately," he observed. Brooks smiled faintly. "Different is not always a bad thing. You hesitate more." Brooks nodded. "Sometimes a few extra seconds are worth more than immediate certainty." Those words reflected lessons he had learned the difficult way. Nearly a month after the original encounter, Captain Laura Mitchell informed Brooks that several federal agencies would conduct a joint training exercise at the complex. Local security personnel had been invited to participate alongside federal investigators, intelligence analysts, and protective service teams. Brooks accepted immediately. On the morning of the exercise, dozens of professionals gathered inside a large auditorium equipped with presentation screens and communication systems. Representatives from multiple agencies discussed coordination, information sharing, and decision-making under pressure. Brooks listened carefully, recognizing situations that once seemed theoretical but now carried deeply personal meaning. Near the end of the session, Deputy Director Daniel Mercer stepped to the podium. Rather than beginning with statistics or procedures, he addressed the room with a simple observation. "Every badge in this room represents responsibility. None of them represents complete knowledge." The audience became completely silent. Mercer continued, "Our greatest strength is not believing we know everything. It is recognizing when another person may be carrying information we cannot yet see." Brooks understood immediately why Mercer had chosen those words. Across the room, Naomi Carter sat quietly among the federal instructors. She was not introduced as the focus of the presentation, nor did she seek attention. She simply participated as another experienced professional helping others improve their ability to work together. During a break, Brooks found an opportunity to thank her again. "I have thought about that morning more times than I can count," he admitted. Naomi smiled gently. "So have I." Brooks hesitated before asking, "If everything happened exactly the same way again, would you handle it differently?" Naomi considered the question with thoughtful honesty. "I would still protect the mission. That was my responsibility." She paused briefly before adding, "But I would also remember that the people standing in front of me are trying to protect something, too." Brooks appreciated the answer because it carried no blame and no attempt to rewrite the past. It acknowledged that two people could act in good faith while still creating unexpected consequences. As the afternoon training concluded and participants prepared to return to their assignments, Brooks realized the most valuable lesson had never appeared on any presentation slide. Trust was important. Procedure was necessary. Experience mattered. But wisdom often began at the moment someone accepted that every story had another side waiting patiently to be understood. 2 months later, the story that almost no one outside a handful of government offices knew quietly reached its final chapter. Officer Ethan Brooks was finishing an afternoon shift when Captain Laura Mitchell walked toward the checkpoint carrying a thin envelope stamped with both local and federal seals. She handed it to him without saying a word. Inside was a formal memorandum summarizing the completed internal review. Brooks read every line carefully. The review concluded that he had acted within the authority granted by his position based on the information available at the time. At the same time, the report recommended new coordination procedures between local security personnel and federal agencies operating within shared facilities. The recommendation included additional communication protocols, updated emergency verification methods, and expanded joint training designed to reduce the chance of similar misunderstandings in the future. Brooks folded the memorandum slowly. He had expected criticism or praise. Instead, he found something more valuable: progress. One difficult morning had become the reason an entire system improved. Later that week, representatives from several agencies gathered once again inside the Jefferson Federal Complex to introduce the revised procedures. Officers, supervisors, analysts, and administrators filled the conference room. The atmosphere felt optimistic rather than formal. Deputy Director Daniel Mercer addressed the audience with quiet confidence. Every organization represented here has the same purpose. We protect people by protecting the truth. That mission becomes stronger every time we learn from experience instead of hiding from it. Brooks noticed several participants taking notes. Others simply listened with thoughtful expressions. Near the front of the room, Naomi Carter reviewed the updated coordination guide before standing to explain one of the new verification systems. Instead of relying upon assumptions during time-sensitive situations, designated federal coordinators would now have secure contact procedures allowing immediate confirmation without exposing classified information. The solution seemed remarkably simple. Brooks wondered why no one had thought of it sooner. After the meeting ended, many participants remained behind discussing the improvements. Brooks approached Naomi one final time. "Looks like something good came out of all of this after all," he said. Naomi smiled warmly. "The best organizations are not the ones that never make mistakes. They are the ones willing to learn from them." Brooks nodded thoughtfully. "I used to think experience meant having all the answers." Naomi looked toward the busy hallway where officers and agents from different departments exchanged handshakes before returning to work. "Experience usually means learning to ask better questions." Those words stayed with Brooks long after she left the building. In the weeks that followed, he noticed small but meaningful changes everywhere around the complex. Communication between agencies became faster. Joint briefings became more common. Officers felt more comfortable requesting clarification before making assumptions. Even new recruits heard the story during training, although the names and classified details remained protected. The lesson did not require them. What mattered was understanding how easily incomplete information could shape confident decisions. On a cool autumn morning, almost exactly 1 year after the incident, Brooks stood once again beneath the same digital clock overlooking the security gate. Employees entered the complex carrying coffee cups, backpacks, and briefcases just as they had every weekday before. The clock displayed the time with quiet precision, but it no longer reminded him of a mistake. It reminded him that every minute offered another opportunity to choose patience over assumption, curiosity over certainty, and professionalism over pride. Somewhere beyond the secure buildings, federal agents continued protecting people whose names the public would never know. Brooks returned his attention to the next visitor approaching the checkpoint, greeted them with calm respect, and realized that the strongest form of authority was never found in the badge someone wore. It was found in the character they demonstrated every time they chose to see the person standing in front of them before making a judgment. One quiet spring morning, nearly 18 months after everything had changed, Officer Ethan Brooks arrived at the Jefferson Federal Complex before sunrise, just as he always had. The eastern sky glowed with soft shades of gold, while the first employees crossed the parking lots carrying travel mugs and laptop bags, beginning another ordinary day that looked remarkably similar to the morning he would never forget. The digital clock above the security gate displayed the time with the same steady precision. Yet Brooks no longer measured those passing minutes with confidence alone. He measured them with perspective. Every greeting he offered carried genuine respect. Every question he asked was thoughtful rather than hurried. Every decision reflected the understanding that every person approaching the gate possessed a story he could not immediately see. Late that morning, a familiar black sport utility vehicle entered the visitor lane. Brooks recognized it instantly. Naomi Carter stepped out wearing the same quiet confidence she had always carried, though this time there was no urgency in her pace. She approached the checkpoint with a warm smile before presenting her credentials. Brooks accepted them with equal warmth. "Good morning, Agent Carter." She smiled. "Good morning, Officer Brooks." The exchange lasted only a few seconds, yet it represented something far greater than either of them needed to explain. Trust had replaced uncertainty. Mutual respect had replaced assumption. Brooks returned her credentials without hesitation. "Have a good day." Naomi nodded. "You too." She continued toward the entrance, disappearing inside the building where another assignment awaited her. Brooks watched only long enough to see the doors close before welcoming the next visitor in line. Life moved forward exactly as it should. Later that afternoon, Captain Laura Mitchell stopped beside the checkpoint and noticed Brooks greeting employees with the same calm professionalism he showed every visitor. She smiled quietly before saying, "You know, people rarely remember every procedure they learn. They remember the lesson that changes the way they think." Brooks looked toward the entrance where hundreds of people had passed safely through the gate that day. "I think I finally understand that." As the sun slowly lowered across the Washington skyline, the familiar sounds of the complex filled the evening air. Cars exited the parking garages. Office lights gradually switched off. Another workday came to a peaceful close. Somewhere beyond the secured buildings, men and women continued serving their communities in ways the public would never fully see. Some wore police uniforms. Some carried federal credentials. Some worked quietly behind office doors. Each accepted responsibilities that demanded judgment, discipline, and integrity. None of them could succeed alone. Brooks locked the checkpoint for the evening and took one final look at the digital clock that had silently witnessed the beginning of an unforgettable lesson. Time had not erased that morning. Time had transformed it. He understood now that true authority was never proven by acting first or speaking the loudest. It was earned by remaining humble enough to recognize that truth often arrived one piece at a time. As he walked toward the parking lot beneath the fading light, one simple thought stayed with him, a thought that would guide every decision he made for the rest of his career. A badge may grant the power to stop someone, but character determines whether you first choose to understand them, because justice reaches its highest purpose only when respect walks beside it every single step of the way.